If the fifth-year graduate student across the table is mouthing the words, "Get out now," then that might be a sign that that's not the best lab for you.
Welcome to Hello PhD, a podcast for scientists and the people who love them. This week on the show, we celebrate fall with pumpkin spice everything and talk about how the culture of your lab environment affects your productivity. Stay with us.
We are back. This is Hello PhD, episode 16. I'm Joshua Hall.
And I'm Daniel Arneman.
And we'll discuss the human side of science and life in the lab. Hi there, Daniel.
Yo, Josh. What's happening?
Not much. How's your week going so far?
So far, so good. We are kind of in the riches this week.
That's right. I thought we could go ahead and continue the good times with two more beers that we got from our Wisconsin listener last week.
Or at least around Wisconsin, because we did have a beer that was from Minnesota.
That's true.
Week.
There was an interloper from Minnesota, but I'm happy to report these two beers we're going to drink this week are both from inside the state of Wisconsin.
So the first one is New Glarus Brewing Company Spotted Cow Ale from New Glarus, Wisconsin. Is that New Glarus or Glarus?
I don't think I know. Potato for me. I'm sure the residents of New Glarus/Glarus are screaming right now what they
at the top of their lungs
say it is.
Please send us the pronunciation and we'll correct ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, this one's great. I love that it's got the label. Looks like it's right from the farm. I read the descriptor of this, and it says, "You know you're in Wisconsin when you see the spotted cow." So we're in Wisconsin right now.
So this one is very light. You know, we've been sampling some pretty heavy IPAs and some dark beers. Nice light color. I think I'm tasting some apple and a little bit of honey on this one, which I like.
Yeah, you know, the nose on this really almost reminds me of a cider.
Yeah. It drinks that easily too, which is a good quality. I can see some of this in summer, maybe even in the winter.
Yeah, and also, Dan, I don't know if you noticed, you can't really see through this one, though the color is light. This is a cloudy one. So I saw on the website that they actually leave the yeast in the beer to give it a little fuller flavor.
It's all those B vitamins, too. I'm probably getting healthier.
You probably remember back in the days when we used to brew, we would leave the yeast in the bottle, not for any reason other than the fact we had no way to get it out.
We were really bad at transferring beer into the bottles. That was the trouble.
That's right. You know, we always tried hard when we poured it to keep the yeast kind of down in the bottom of the bottle, but I didn't know that when I poured this, so we got it all right here in the glass.
Well, like true hipsters, we did it before it was cool. Now we would be like, oh, that adds to the texture of the mouthfeel.
Looks like you left the yeast in there.
Now, you really want to try a second beer now? We're going to space these out, but maybe we can try them both at the top of the show.
You know, I say let's go for it. So number 2, this is the one actually I was most excited to try, just based on the bottle.
Okay, what do you see on there?
Okay, so this is the Carbon 4. That's carbon with a K, though.
Like you do.
And this is the Fantasy Factory India Pale Ale. And, Dan, we got to put a photo of this on the show notes.
What is coming out of the Fantasy Factory?
Okay, so on the label here, we have a cat with a ninja headband, and it looks like a golden pistol riding on a unicorn with a rainbow in the background.
And is the unicorn doing anything exciting? I see some extra stuff coming out of its face.
So its eye is glowing red, and there's fire coming out of its nose.
Okay, so we've got a ninja cowboy cat on a flame-breathing unicorn.
That's the one.
Let's taste it. See if we can get all of those flavors.
A lot of fruitiness. You know, this is something I love about an IPA that's done well, is you don't just get overwhelmed with the bitterness, but you really get that fruity characteristic come through.
Yeah, this one, it really does have a nice balance. It's not overly tart. It's kind of easy to drink, but it's got that piney hop flavor. I really need to find out what type of hops are producing that kind of like pine flavor. I like it.
This has a lot of hops in it for sure, but it's balanced well.
Yeah.
So this is a good one.
I feel like I could ride a fire-breathing unicorn right now.
That's right. I think we definitely need to get to Wisconsin. They've got some quality brews.
Yeah, I said in the opener that we were doing everything pumpkin spice today. I'm actually pretty glad we're not doing pumpkin spice beer. I'm not one of these people that wants to eat a I don't want to drink a beer that tastes like a cookie or like a pumpkin pie. If I want those things, I will go eat them.
No, I figure it's inevitable. We're going to have to do a pumpkin beer
Probably, yeah.
at some point this fall. But actually we're...
Prove me wrong, people. Send me a pumpkin beer that I'll try it and maybe I'll like it.
I've always said my favorite beer is free beer.
Fair enough.
So if you send it...
This is free beer.
If you send it, we will drink it.
Very good. Speaking of pumpkin flavors, I thought it was quite funny. There was a press release that came out this week saying that Fisher Scientific was going to release pumpkin spice agarose.
Yeah, and this is from the esteemed journal Proceedings of the Natural Institute of Science, or PNIS.
And you didn't even make that up. So clearly satire, but they did a very funny write-up where they announced the release of this pumpkin spice agarose, and they quote the vice president of corporate marketing, and he says, "We think this is a great product to fit the need. Plus, it smells so much better than original agarose. Scientists don't have to worry about any contamination from pumpkin DNA because, like most other pumpkin spice products, pumpkin spice agarose does not actually contain any pumpkin."
Yeah, I got a good chuckle out of this. Tweeted this out earlier today. But you guys should definitely check out the PNIS site. This is a good time.
Be very careful how you type that.
NSFW.
It's a satire website, but they were sharing in the festivities of fall.
So, Dan, we got a question that came in via Twitter this week.
The Twitter sphere erupted.
Why don't you read it?
Let me go ahead. Hi, Josh plus Dan, which is really ironic because I just carved that into a tree before we started the show.
Friends forever.
Friends forever, BFFs. Would love to hear a discussion about the work culture and differing work ethic at different tiers of institutes. I visited Boston over the weekend, and I was struck by the urgency all around, which I miss at my institute. I wonder how much more productive I would be surrounded by a hive mentality, and that's in quotes. What do you think? Interesting.
Yeah, so I guess this gets a little bit at culture, right? Work culture.
Yeah, it's a question, and I don't think this is just a lab question. I think this applies to really any organization. I don't care if you're in a biotech industry or you're in an office setting or you're an administrator. What does it mean when the people around you are motivated and working hard, and how does that change your productivity and your experience? They describe this urgency and they describe this hive, which I think really reminisces or calls to mind bees. Like, we're all
constantly buzzing, constantly working.
Yep, and you sense it. And
synchronous.
I don't know if you've been in situations like that where you sense that everybody around you is firing on all cylinders.
Everybody's in the zone. Everybody has a job to do.
And the
it's
alternative,
like a dance,
where everybody's kind of like phoning it in and they trying to get out of there and surfing the web.
Yeah, and that can be very demotivating. And honestly, that culture can be, that can really rub off. A few people, you come into an environment where people are high intensity, working hard. You can't help but work hard, and the converse is certainly true as well.
Yeah, I think that's true. In a group setting, we are going to conform to whatever normal is, and I don't think that makes us bad people. I think it's just a reality. So finding the right situation makes a difference.
Yeah, so I guess, are we agreeing that there is an effect of the culture on your productivity?
I think there is. And I want to talk about some of the underlying things, like what makes a culture productive, what makes people feel like working hard. I think the first thing is, are people excited about what they're doing? If you're in a place where everybody's just like, oh, this stupid thing, I don't care about it. Nobody's going to work hard. Nobody's going to... Hopefully that's not the case at this whatever institution they're talking about. But the reality is you can be disinterested in what you're doing. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a whole lot to be said about when your identity lines up with the work that you have to do. Yep.
So if you feel like the tasks at hand really are a part of who you are and a part of what you want to be and align with, I guess, your worldview and your morals, it's much easier to be motivated.
Yeah, and you feel like you're making a difference. I mean, it's kind of an expression of who you are as a person. You're going to be more involved. And I think that's, if you can find people living like that, that is such an important environment to be in and stay in.
Absolutely. And, I think I can remember both of those times in my life where I was feeling very productive, other times I wasn't. And when I think about the times that I wasn't, there was a very clear distinction in my mind between when I was doing work and when I wasn't doing work. And I can still remember times, when I would need to do work, and maybe it was on an evening or on a weekend, and I resented the fact
Yep.
that I had to go into work. Maybe I had to go into lab at that moment.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
But conversely, right now I really do feel like the work I'm doing is me. I feel very much connected to it. So now, I often will work some in the evenings. Maybe I'll go do some work for a few hours on the weekend. And I don't think twice about it. I don't feel stressed about it. I don't feel upset about it. But I feel like my work now is more of just an extension of who I am. And so
it's
it
not
makes
work
all
anymore.
the difference in the world. Actually, I had a friend, Dan, I think you knew him too. And he said this quote that has always stuck with me. And he said, "Find a job you love and you'll never work again."
Yep, I've heard that.
Yeah, and it's a little bit cheesy, but I think the sentiment is true, right? You find the right fit for you, you find the right work, and it doesn't feel as much like work. So,
and I wonder if we're listing some of these more descriptive terms, these factors that are probably playing into the sense of productivity. And I wonder, as this person looks at their own institution and they look at whatever they visited in Boston, can they go down the list and say, okay, I see people who are excited about their work. I see people who are doing the thing that they are kind of made to do, that they're passionate about. They feel a sense of urgency. They feel like the work they're doing has to be done soon. Otherwise, something else will happen.
Yeah, I think there can be characteristics like that, because I don't think, we started out just talking about, it's important to be productive, to have identity with the work. But I don't think that can be the whole thing, because that would say, in a culture that's less urgent, does that just mean, well, no one identifies with the work? Or in an area where everybody identifies with the work, everybody's really motivated and you find the hive mentality. And I don't think that's the whole picture.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
What do you think creates this sense of urgency?
I think in some cases it's whether there is some downside to waiting. If you're in a field that's very competitive and other people are going to publish, I always felt that sense of urgency when I was in those labs. Mm-hmm. If you're the only person studying your protein, like, yeah, I guess you can do it tomorrow. And it's a different sensation. I think the culture of how lab funding is shaping up. So if you see the clock ticking on that research grant, I think people might work a little faster, although I doubt that that's what's happening in the Boston situation. Mm-hmm. As students approach milestones, when I'm about to finish my dissertation or I just have to get this paper out, and I have that deadline, I'm going to work harder and I'm going to work faster because I have just a little bit left to go and I want to get it done.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is a huge aside, but this is going back to a few episodes ago when we were talking about the 8 ways to improve biomedical research. And one of those suggestions from that article was a shorter training time for grad students and postdocs. And, one of the things we talked a little bit about was the potential of having a finite period of time for graduate training. And, that was one of the things that really occurred to me that can be demotivating about graduate school is there's no defined end date. There's not always that pressure point, that sense of urgency to get done at a specific time. You can almost always put it off to tomorrow, unless you do have that external circumstance of, waiting to get scooped or whatever.
Yeah, it's totally true. And I think that's a fair point, that we could switch the system. We could change the motivation there and help make things more productive and more urgent. But one of the other things that makes a lot of difference is how do you work with the people that are near you? So it felt like in the question when they're talking about a hive, in a hive, everybody's working together and there's not conflict. But if you feel really isolated in your lab or in your floor, let's say, or if none of the labs talk to each other, maybe each individual lab is doing great work and is very productive, but maybe you're not part of this system where everybody feels like they're working hard. One of the things I think that stood out in this question is, does it have anything to do with the type of institution? Do you think that it's like you land at a top tier research university and everything's great, and you go to a small liberal arts college and everybody's sitting around? What do you think the split is there?
I don't think it's that simple. I don't think you can just, tie it to type of institution and say, well, at a top tier R1 research institution, everybody's working hard all the time. It's
people
a beehive.
In Boston work harder than people anywhere else. That might be true.
That could be true. It could be true. That is one hypothesis. However, I've got a little bit of data that makes me think maybe that's not the case.
At least 2 anecdotes That's data.
N equals 2 is better than
There
N
we
equals
go. Yep.
1, right? So, Dan, I had 2 conversations within the past year, both at my institution at UNC. And the first one was with a PI. And, the PI, we were just talking a little bit, and he mentioned the culture of where he was a postdoc, which was another research institution. And he talked about how the culture there, people were working all the time. No matter what hour of the day you came in, no matter what day of the week, there were always people working, late hours, all the time. And he felt like now, where he was in his lab, on his floor, it would be 5, 6 o'clock, and everybody was cleared out. And he was talking about what a different culture it was than what he was used to as a postdoc.
Yeah, it does seem different.
Yeah. So to him, perhaps the culture is very different where he is now than where it was.
And he was implying he was longing for those old days?
Yeah, I think he had mixed feelings about it. I think now also he had a family and there were pros and cons.
Yeah, sure.
Right, but it did seem like maybe there was a little bit of longing, similar to the listener, for those days, that hive mentality. I could see that imagery in the way he was describing it.
Sure, you ride the wave of everyone's enthusiasm. I think it's a exciting place to work.
Absolutely. And so then on the flip side, very recently I had a conversation with a postdoc who had done her graduate work at a different research institution, a top research institution. And she had just the opposite to say. She remembered as a graduate student this very laid back, slow-paced atmosphere. But now that she was at UNC, in the lab she was in, people worked all the time, nights, weekends, no matter when you came in. There was sort of this expectation people were working all the time. Same institution, right? But 2 different people with
maybe different departments or different floors or different labs.
Absolutely. And so what that made me think, when I read this question, is that maybe it's not so much an institution to institution variation, but maybe department to department, floor to floor, as you said, or even a lab to lab difference. I think there could be a little bit of proximity effect. Maybe if you have one lab that has this really intense work ethic, maybe that rubs off on the neighboring labs. But I don't know. I think, more and more, this could be some lab to lab variability.
So if that is the case, then it seems like that's something that you should be including as you search for your next spot.
Yeah. So the other thing that was clear from those conversations was that whereas, the one individual seemed to be missing that very intense work ethic culture, the other person, just the opposite. She was feeling a little more stifled in the more high-pressure environment and was longing for this sort of slower-paced environment.
And it turns out they were both in the exact same lab. They were both feeling the same elephant in different parts, and they had a different experience.
It could be. Dan, another thing I wanted to say about, the culture, something that can affect the culture of a lab, is sometimes I think you have to look at the life stage of a lot of the people in the lab, because I know personally speaking, when I was an undergraduate, I was at a small liberal arts school. And so as far as tiers of institutions go, this was not a place that had PhD students. There were no postdocs. So you could say, on one hand, you would perceive this would be a lower intensity place.
Yeah, I think that's what I would assume.
However, I remember working there, being an undergraduate and being there with predominantly other undergraduates, master's degree students, and most of us were young. We were in our, early 20s, didn't have families. I remember working, especially over the summer, we would be there from first thing in the morning. We would stay till 7, 8 o'clock at night. We would all go together, get dinner, come back to the lab, often stay until late into the wee hours of the morning. We'd come back and do it all again.
Yeah, and that is that's the feeling of cohesion and of busyness. And I think that's what the person was describing.
Absolutely. I mean, we very much were a hive. We were working very hard.
But you did not have any children.
Yeah, it was just me. The only things I had to think about at that time were my lab work, and so my brain capacity was mostly filled with my lab work during that time. And I know from having a family now, having a spouse and children, that I'm just pulled in so many different directions. I'm actually not able to devote as much time to being in the lab. But one thing we mentioned last week with the time management is you, Dan, told a story about a postdoc in your grad school lab who was married,
who got
had a family.
way more done, and she had a family, and she basically did it all. So, but she wasn't there until midnight. And if you showed up, if you were sitting there at 6 p.m. and you thought, oh, why is the lab empty? You would have this sense that you were the only person still working. But the reality is she did 10 times more work than you did while she was there.
Yeah, that's true. And so I think it's a point worth mentioning that, life stage can certainly have an impact on that. So that might be something else for you to factor in when you're entering into whether it's a graduate school lab or a postdoc lab, is looking around and seeing like, okay, what are my restraints going to be as far as my family, as far as other commitments I have, and maybe looking around at the other people in the lab who maybe have similar commitments and see how that's handled in the context of that lab culture.
Yeah, and I think if you are one of the people that has a lot of nostalgia, like the person you described at your work, if you have a lot of nostalgia about how it used to be when you used to work at a very high-intensity lab, please take into account what life stage were you at that time and what life stage were the other people in your lab, because maybe other people are experiencing that right now in your lab, but now you are not part of it because you're not at that stage. You know what I mean? Like if you're going home, you're not seeing that everybody's staying there and working very intensively.
Yeah, that's a great point. I have such fond memories of that time, of working really hard with people. I formed very close relationships with those people at the time. But if I was back in that environment now, it would be completely different.
There's no way you'd be able to. I mean, you wouldn't want to. You wouldn't want to do it now.
I wouldn't want to. You're right.
Priority shift.
I do want to mention one thing, and that is, I don't think it's necessarily the labs that, working the longest hours and, have that sort of competitive culture. Those are the only successful labs. I think there are different ways to be successful and different ways to be productive. Certainly, and different styles.
The number of hours is not the definition of whether you're doing the work that you were intended to do and the work that you love. I mean, you can work 8 to 5 and love your work.
Absolutely. And, I think what it really boils down to when we think of productivity, because really productivity is the key. It's not the number of hours that one works. It's not how busy one seems, but it's, how much progress are you making? How far are you kicking the can down the road?
I did 400 experiments because it was really just one experiment. I was so tired that I messed it up 399 times.
Exactly. I actually remember in graduate school at one point having to take a step back because I was having that exact problem. I was trying to do so many experiments at once that maybe I was doing them, at 75% accuracy. And what I actually had to do was do fewer experiments, and my overall progress moved quicker because I was more focused.
It really ended when you put that mouse onto the thermocycler. It was just, what a nightmare.
It made a huge mess.
Yeah, terrible.
A huge mess. So anyway, I think what it boils down to is, it's really important for each of us as individuals to really be self-aware and think about what culture do I thrive in? Based on who I am, what environment am I most productive? And so some people certainly will thrive in a highly competitive culture and will maybe even need that highly competitive culture to be productive. They may actually have a hard time being or feeling motivated in a more low-pressure situation.
Yeah, and if that's you, you will grow to resent the people in the more laid-back lab. And it's the reality. If you want to be working from 6 in the morning till 10 at night, and you watch everybody, kind of roll in at 10 a.m. and roll out at 5, you're going to hate that. So pay a lot of attention to what your own style is, because it can really create bad blood in the lab.
Absolutely. And then, other people will feel crippled by that competitive environment. That competitive environment, rather than motivating them, will make them feel paralyzed. And so
pause a moment here. Which type of person do you think you are, listener of the Hello PhD podcast?
Let's all take a moment and reflect.
Yeah, I think it's actually, you don't have to think that long to understand which type of person you are. You'll think about what your priorities are in life, and you'll know what your goals are and what motivates you. If you've got 3 kids and 7 hobbies, you're going to know, hey, I don't want to be in the lab 24 hours a day. If you wake up and you cannot stop thinking about the next experiment, you do want to be in the lab 24 hours a day. And you'll know this about yourself immediately.
Yeah, and I feel like we say this over and over in so many different ways, but at the end of the day, what the goal should be for everyone is to identify what am I passionate about, and then what is the career that most aligns with my natural talents and my natural passions. Because if you find that, if you really end up in that situation where all of those factors align, it's going to be very easy to be motivated, very easy to pour yourself into your work, right? I think a lot of times where you feel demotivated are when your natural skills, your natural interests, and your work environment don't mesh.
Yeah, it's a very, very good point. You might be I want to work 24 hours a day in the field that you really love.
Yeah, and either culture is okay. If you're at the institution or in the lab or the department that has a more laid back feel, that's perfectly valid if that's for you. If you're in the high pressure, cutthroat environment, and I do think, I've heard enough people talk about certain institutions. I do think that exists. I think that culture is perpetuated in certain institutional ways.
The probability of finding
some places.
Each type at a certain institution may be different. Yeah,
absolutely. But it's important to know that, and it's important to do your homework and your due diligence before you enter into that environment. And so, that kind of leads me to my last point on this, which is when you choose an institution, but especially when you choose a lab, you need to make sure you take into account the culture as much as, if not more so, than just the science you're going to be doing there. Because I think a lot of times trainees, grad students, postdocs especially, will focus on the science they think they want to do and will be blind to the culture or the environment, the work environment that they're entering into. And no matter how much you love the science going in, if the culture is not a good fit for you, you're going to burn out, and it's not going to be a good situation.
This is tricky because now, we're saying you've got to find science that you care about. I mean, I think that's important. You have to find science you care about. We said in a previous episode, you need to find somebody who's going to train you and give you the opportunities. If you want to do outreach, you better make sure that you find a lab that can allow that. And now we're also adding on to this the culture, the work ethic, the style of leadership of that lab. I wonder, are we searching for a unicorn
that breathes fire
out of its
nose with a ninja cat?
Yeah, not to do a segue, but it probably does narrow down your options. Maybe that's good. Maybe you had 15 labs you thought were going to be a great idea, and now there are 3.
Well,
that could be a good thing.
You know how many you can join at a time?
1 lab.
Just 1. And so...
some people join 2, kind of.
Well, that's true. But I think, as a graduate student, you have a great opportunity because you don't even have to guess. Most graduate programs, at least in the sciences, you do these lab rotations, right? So you get to actually try the thing out for, 10 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever it is. So you should get a pretty good feel. I think it gets a little trickier if you're on the postdoc search because honestly what you're trying to do is all you have at first is the science or maybe a network connection. Maybe your PI knows a different PI. And then often you go for the interview, you visit the place for, half a day, 2 days. And so you have to glean all the information you can about that work environment in that 2-day span. And so I think it's very important for you when you're on these interview situations, whether you're in a rotation or you're on a postdoc interview or something else, you need to make sure you're not only checking out the science, but you're having the appropriate conversations, maybe with other people in the lab. Even better, if you can identify someone who's left the lab, a previous lab member, that person is going to be more likely to be honest with you about what the lab environment is like. And you may feel more free to ask them culture questions because I think sometimes you feel a little unsure about asking a question about lab culture when you're still in the interview phase.
That's a great point. I remember kind of nonverbal agreements with people in the lab that if this person doesn't ask this question, we won't tell them about this weird thing about our lab. You know what I mean? Like you don't want to say negative things about your lab, but you know that this is kind of weird and they should probably know that, but I'm not going to be the one to tell them. Yeah,
pay attention to subtle clues. Like if the fifth-year graduate student across the table is mouthing the words, "Get out now," then that might be a sign that that's not the best lab for you.
So best of luck finding your fire-breathing unicorn. We hope that you are the ninja cowboy cat that can ride it to success.
We hope so, but it's out there for everyone. Yeah.
So moving on to the etymology puzzle. If you'll remember last week's clue, it was, if a 2-headed mouse runs up your arm and a 3-headed mouse runs down your arm, what are the names of the mice? Seems like a total non sequitur, but that was the clue.
I think I know this one because
Walk us through it.
Because I have actually heard several of the preceding episodes.
Oh, you have? That's great.
I have.
Thank you for listening.
Long-time listener, first-time caller.
We appreciate you listening. That's great.
All right, so I remember, Daniel, the mouse a few episodes back, that had to do with muscle.
Yeah, if you hear me mention a mouse, you know that's the warning bell that I'm going to talk about a muscle.
So I think we might be talking about a muscle that runs up the arm and another muscle that runs down the arm. And when I think 2 heads, 3 heads, that is leading me to some prefixes bi and tri.
Yep, I think you're getting very, very close.
I'm going to say bicep and tricep.
You are almost entirely correct.
Oh, no.
I'll tell you where we went wrong in a second, but you're absolutely right. It's biceps and triceps, and it's bi for 2, tri for 3, and seps comes from caput, which remember we talked about the capitate bone in your wrist?
The head.
The head, 2-headed and 3-headed. So the biceps brachii has 2 insertion points on the scapula, so it's got 2 little, 2 heads to it, and then the triceps, there are 3 heads. But the reason you were almost correct is because biceps is singular. It is also plural. There is, if you talk to classicists, there is no such word as bicep. So if you're like, oh, my left bicep hurts, I'm going to have to punch you in it.
My left biceps hurts.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Now you know. And if you hear somebody in your lab say it wrong, you can punch them in it.
Using your biceps.
Exactly. So I've got a clue for next week if you are ready.
I'm ready.
Okay. Insects in this order have 4 wings that are covered in fish scales. I'll read it again. Insects in this order have 4 wings that are covered in fish scales. So, I'm looking for a scientific word described by the clue. Once you get it, you'll find that the literal meaning of that science word is a phrase in the clue itself. If you think you know the answer, email it to puzzle@hellophd.com. I'll randomly select a winner from all the correct responses and send the lucky puzzler an Amazon gift card. I've heard people do not like iTunes gift cards.
Yeah, I think as far as we can tell, not everyone uses iTunes.
I mean, yeah, that makes sense to me. I have an Android phone, so...
But many people use Amazon, we're counting on.
I think everybody uses Amazon. If they don't, Amazon will come to you and find you.
But that's true. That's true. You can buy anything there, except Hello PhD episodes, because they are free.
Absolutely free. We hope you enjoyed it.
Dan, thanks. This was a great show, and thanks again to our listener in Wisconsin who sent us 4 delicious beers that we've enjoyed. I'm kind of sad they're gone.
I know it. There must be a lot of good beer in Wisconsin. If I guess it wasn't a random sample of 4, but all 4 were quite tasty.
Well, I just want to point out...
Well, all 3, and then 1 was from Minnesota, and it was all right.
I would like to point out that, now that I have to factor in Minnesota, there are 48 additional states where we have not received beer from. So...
That is true.
Help us out, listeners.
Do you count the one that I brought back from Massachusetts? No.
Shabba dabba doo.
That was good.
Well, this has been a great show. If you have a topic for a future show, or if, like our listener today, you have a question that you would like to hear discussed, you can email it to us, podcast@hellophd.com, or you can send us a tweet at hellophd, or reach out to us on our Facebook page.
And we're on Stitcher. We mentioned that last week. We'd love to have you listen there if that is your podcatcher of choice.
Check us out. Give us a rating if you like the show, and even more importantly, tell a friend so they can join the conversation too. It's been fun, and we will talk to you next week.
See you next week. Bye.